There's a 5-mile strip of rock sitting in the Persian Gulf, and right now it controls whether Iran's entire economy lives or dies. There's a 5-mile strip of rock sitting in the Persian Gulf, and right now it controls whether Iran's entire economy lives or dies. Most people have never even heard its name. But this small island might be the single most important piece of land in the whole Iran conflict. It's called Kharg Island, and here's the number that explains everything. Somewhere around 90% of Iran's oil exports flow through this one spot. Not 40%, not 60%, 90%. Every dollar that funds Iran's missile programs, every rial that pays for the forces keeping the regime in power, almost all of it passes through this tiny island first. So when people ask why the United States keeps circling back to this one target instead of just attacking the whole country at once, this is the answer. You don't need to fight a nation of 90 million people head on. You just need to find the one artery keeping the whole body alive and squeeze it. That's exactly what's been happening on Kharg Island for months now, and most of the world hasn't been paying close attention. Let's go back to where this started, because it didn't happen overnight. Back in March, the United States carried out its first major strike on the island. American forces hit more than 90 separate military sites there. But here's the part that matters most. They left the oil and gas facilities completely alone. Think about that for a second. The U.S. had the ability to destroy Kharg's oil terminals right then and there. They chose not to. After the strike, officials confirmed that American forces had destroyed military targets on the island, but made a clear point of saying the oil facilities were left standing. Why would anyone do that on purpose? Because oil doesn't stay in one country. It moves through a global market. If Kharg's exports went offline overnight, it wouldn't just hurt Iran. It would spike gas prices in cities all over the world, including right here at home. So the strategy from day one has been careful and controlled. Hit the air defenses, hit the radar systems, hit the military bases guarding the island, but leave the pipelines and storage tanks standing because those are worth more as a threat than as a smoking pile of rubble. This is what people in military planning call leverage, not mercy. It's not that the U.S. is being kind to Iran. It's the opposite. Every strike that spares the oil facilities is really saying the same thing. We could take this away from you completely, anytime we choose. And that threat hanging over the regime's head is more powerful than actually following through with it. Because once you destroy something, you can't use it as a bargaining chip anymore. A regime that still has something to lose is a regime you can still pressure. A regime with absolutely nothing left is far more dangerous because it has no reason left to hold back. That's the real reason Kharg Island keeps showing up again and again in this conflict. It's not just another military target, it's the one piece of leverage that ties everything else together, the economy, the military, and the regime's grip on power, all in a single place. And as we're about to see, the story of Kharg Island is really just getting started. What began as a single strike in March turned into a repeating pattern, a growing psychological battle, and eventually talk of something much bigger, actually taking control of the island itself. That's where we're headed next, and it's where this story starts to get a lot more serious. A government agency said something never happened. Reporters said it did. And nobody outside a small circle of decision makers actually knows who's telling the truth. That's exactly what happened after the second wave of strikes hit Kharg Island. In April, new reports came out, this time through Axios, quoting a senior U.S. official who confirmed another round of strikes on military targets across the island. Same pattern as before, hit the defenses, leave the oil alone. It was like watching someone slowly turn a dial instead of flipping a switch, and that's exactly the point. This is what's called escalation management. The goal is to make Iran feel the pressure tightening bit by bit, without ever giving them a reason to feel like they have nothing left to lose. But here's where things got confusing, and where a lot of bad information started spreading. At one point, CENTCOM, the U.S. military command overseeing this region, actually came out and denied that a strike on Kharg Island had happened at all. That directly contradicted earlier reports, and it even contradicted statements that had already come from other parts of the government. So what's going on here? Is it because official confirmation takes time while assessments are still being finalized? Maybe? Is it because different agencies are working off slightly different information about the same target? Also possible. Nobody watching from the outside can say for certain which strikes were confirmed and which ones were walked back, because the information coming out of this region changes by the hour, and a lot of what shows up online is edited, mislabeled, or completely made up. What we can say for sure is the pattern. Kharg Island keeps getting hit, whether it's officially confirmed right away or not. And every single time, Iran insists their oil operations are running completely normal. But independent satellite images tell a very different story than the one coming out of Iranian state media. This is where the real battle isn't just happening with bombs, it's happening with information. Every time Kharg gets struck, Iranian state-run outlets go into overdrive, trying to convince their own people and the rest of the world that nothing serious happened. There have been reports from Iranian media claiming the island's infrastructure suffered little to no damage and that everything was running as normal. Meanwhile, satellite companies have released before and after images showing a very different reality on the ground. This isn't the first time this kind of gap between claim and reality has shown up in this conflict. Remember when Iran claimed they had fully closed the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping? At that exact same time, thousands of commercial ships were sailing straight through it without any problem. So when Iran says Kharg Island is fine, that claim deserves the same level of trust you'd give someone trying to sell you a car with a grinding transmission, insisting it's actually a special feature. All of this matters because it shows something bigger happening underneath the surface. This isn't a simple story of bombs falling and damage reports coming in. It's a slow, repeated cycle. A strike happens, Iran denies it, satellite images contradict the denial, and the world moves on to the next. Headline before anyone fully processes what just happened. And each time that cycle repeats, it chips away a little more at how much anyone can actually trust what either side is saying in real time. That uncertainty isn't an accident. It benefits both sides in different ways. For the US, keeping some ambiguity around exactly what's been hit keeps Iran guessing about what might come next. For Iran, denying damage helps hold together the appearance of strength for a population already dealing with economic pressure. But underneath all of that noise, one thing keeps holding true. Kharg Island keeps getting targeted, keeps getting struck, and keeps sitting at the center of everything happening in this conflict, no matter how much confusion surrounds each individual report. One word changed everything about how serious this threat really is, and it wasn't destroy, it was seize. Back in June, there was a direct threat to hit Iran very hard and to take control of Iran's energy base on Kharg Island. Seize, not destroy. That's a completely different word, and it tells you something important about what's actually being considered. Multiple reports have come out saying the idea of a marine operation, actually landing forces and taking physical control of the island, has been explored at some level. Would that really happen? Occupying a foreign island in the middle of a hostile region is an entirely different level of commitment compared to a bombing run. You're talking about holding ground, defending a perimeter, and supplying a base sitting just 20 miles off the coast of a country that still has drone swarms, fast attack boats, and coastal missile systems scattered nearby. That's not a decision anyone makes lightly. But even the fact that this idea is being talked about publicly tells you something. Kharg Island isn't just a bombing target anymore in the minds of some planners. It's being treated as a strategic prize. Think about what it would mean to actually control the island that processes 90% of a nation's oil exports. You wouldn't just be weakening that regime, you'd be holding the valve on their entire economy in your own hand. Iran clearly understands this too. There have been reports of the regime moving additional military personnel and air defense systems onto Kharg, specifically preparing for the possibility of this kind of operation. Iran's own parliament speaker made comments about enemies preparing to occupy one of the country's islands, without directly naming which one. But everyone listening knew exactly which island he meant. When government officials start dancing around naming a target because saying it out loud makes the threat feel more real, that tells you everything about how seriously this is being taken behind closed doors. Now let's actually look at what's sitting on that island, because Kharg isn't some small makeshift setup. It's a genuinely massive piece of energy infrastructure. The Fowlett Continental Oil Company facilities alone can move somewhere in the range of 500,000 barrels of crude oil every single day. There are also petrochemical operations, along with pipeline networks running underneath the Gulf, connecting the island back to Iran's major onshore oil fields. This isn't some improvised smuggling setup. This is decades of serious engineering, built specifically because Kharg's deep water access lets massive tankers dock and load without needing to navigate the shallower waters closer to the mainland. Every part of it was built for one purpose: moving as much oil as physically possible, as fast as possible, out to the rest of the world. And here's something a lot of people don't realize. This isn't even the first time in modern history that Kharg Island has ended up in the crosshairs of a long military campaign. Back in the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi forces repeatedly targeted this exact island, because military planners back then understood the same basic idea that planners understand today. You weaken a country by going after its main export point, not by grinding through its entire army, piece by piece. History has a way of repeating itself in this region, and Kharg Island keeps ending up back in the same position because geography never changes, even when the politics around it do. Oil can be replaced. Trust cannot. And that difference is exactly what makes this entire standoff so dangerous. Kharg Island doesn't exist by itself. It's directly tied to the bigger fight happening over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has repeatedly claimed they've effectively shut down the strait to international shipping, and every single time, that claim falls apart within about 24 hours. U.S. Central Command has been documenting this in real time, redirecting, disabling, and boarding vessels that try to break the rules while still letting humanitarian shipments pass through normally. At one point, CENTCOM had processed somewhere around 1,000 vessels through the strait over several months. That's a fraction of what used to move through before this conflict, but it's still solid proof the waterway remains open, and that Iran doesn't actually control an international shipping lane just because it claims to. There's also been direct enforcement tied specifically to Kharg. An unloaded oil tanker was struck and disabled while trying to reach the island in violation of the blockade, after ignoring multiple warnings. That's not random. That's a clear signal that anyone trying to keep Kharg's oil moving quietly, outside the rules, is going to get caught. Here's what makes this whole situation so uniquely risky. Oil is something you can replace. Leverage is not. Every time military targets around Kharg get hit while the oil infrastructure itself is left standing, it sends a message that sounds less like a warning and more like a countdown clock. It's not really about permanently cutting off Iran's oil revenue, at least not yet. It's about using the threat of cutting it off completely as the single biggest bargaining chip on the table. Iran also depends heavily on something called a shadow fleet, a network built over years of sanctions pressure to keep oil moving through disguised tankers, fake flags, and ship-to-ship transfers out in open water. It's genuinely advanced from a logistics standpoint. But all of that sophistication depends on one simple thing: having somewhere physical to actually load the oil in the first place. No amount of disguising a tanker's identity changes the fact that it still needs a real port to fill up at, and that keeps bringing everything back to the same island. This leverage strategy comes with a real risk, though. It only works as long as Iran believes the U.S. is actually willing to follow through eventually. If Iran starts to believe the oil terminals will never actually be destroyed, because of how badly that would shake up global oil markets, the entire threat loses its power. That's exactly why the pressure keeps repeating instead of stopping. Each strike is a reminder that the option is still on the table. Iran's neighbors are watching all of this closely too. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have their own oil infrastructure nearby. They've stayed on high alert throughout this entire situation. Worried Iran might lash out at regional targets if pressure on Kharg keeps building. Debris from intercepted weapons has already hit buildings in Dubai, thankfully without serious injuries, a clear reminder that when a conflict like this centers on one choke point, the effects don't stay contained to just the two main sides involved. So where does this actually go from here? Honestly, there isn't a clean answer. Does the pressure campaign eventually push toward a direct strike on the oil terminals? Does Iran finally agree to real concessions to get out from under the blockade? Or does this just keep grinding on as a slow burn for months? Longer? All three of those outcomes are still realistically on the table. And which one happens probably depends less on any single military decision, and more on how much economic pain the regime is willing to absorb before something inside starts to crack.